The chandeliers at La Vienne, Manhattan's crown jewel of fine dining, glittered like captured constellations. Light fractured through crystal drops, scattering across marble floors, polished so perfectly they seemed to swallow reflections whole. Linen-draped tables stood like islands of quiet luxury, adorned with golden cutlery and stemware, waiting to cradle secrets too expensive to be spoken aloud. A jazz trio played softly in the corner, saxophone, low piano, tender bass, steady, as if even music had learned to whisper in the presence of so much wealth. This wasn't simply a restaurant. La Vienne was theater ritual illusion, a curated performance of perfection. And into this curated world walked Isaac Robinson. At 43, he was not merely a man of wealth, he was one of the architects of Manhattan's skyline. Entire glass towers carried his name. Entire neighborhoods shifted under the weight of his investments. He entered La Vienne not as a guest, but as a monarch surveying his dominion. His tailored midnight blue suit clung to his tall, lean frame with the precision of artistry rather than tailoring. Platinum cufflinks flashed discreetly at his wrists, a subtle rebellion against the restraint of the evening. Salt and pepper strands streaked through his thick hair, combing back with the care that only discipline could teach. His face bore the sharp planes of power softened only by a fatigue no spa treatment could quite erase. When Isaac smiled at the maitre d', the movement was controlled, practiced polite without warmth. "Good evening, Daniel." The maitre d' inclined his head, voice reverent. "Mr. Robinson, your usual table is waiting. Shall I have the 82 Chateau Margaux opened for you?" Isaac hesitated. Wine tonight felt heavy. He shook his head. "No, thank you. Just still water. My guest may join me later." "As you wish, sir." Daniel led him through the dining room, weaving past murmured conversations about hedge funds and elections, past influencers air-kissing over foie gras, past senators leaning in too close to their crystal glasses. These were Isaac's people. The world of power dressed in silk and velvet, lubricated by caviar and applause. And yet, as he sat at his discreet corner table, overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, a sensation pressed into him that he had almost forgotten. Unease. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture of muscle memory from the boardroom, a tic he resorted to whenever thoughts began to crowd too quickly. He should have felt at home here. This room was his arena, this city, his stage. But something about the night pressed differently on his skin. The laughter around him felt distant, hollow, like echoes behind locked doors. His phone buzzed a message from Sabrina Klein. Running 10 minutes late. The meeting dragged on. "You'll love my new red dress." Isaac's lips curved faintly. Sabrina, poised, brilliant, pragmatic, was everything his world approved of. She fit perfectly into the mosaic of his life, sharp where he needed strategy, graceful where he needed presentation, detached enough never to demand more than he was willing to give. He typed back, looking forward to it, then set the phone down. And yet, as the device left his hand, his gaze wandered. His chest felt unsettled, like a violin tuned a bit too tight. The atmosphere of La Vienne, which once cocooned him in comfort, now seemed to observe him instead. Then, a scent, subtle, unexpected. A breath of cinnamon and warm vanilla floated through the air. Not from the kitchen. This wasn't the scent of plated luxury. No, this was more intimate, handmade, real. The kind of scent that clung to skin and lingered in sheets long after dawn. It struck him like a blade of memory. Camila Harris. He blinked, his heartbeat tripping. No, he hadn't thought of her in months, or so he told himself. But the truth lived beneath his skin. Camila was not a ghost. She was a song half remembered, but never forgotten, humming beneath every quiet moment of his life. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of love that burned incandescent, and fights that seared just as fiercely. She was a brilliant creative director whose campaigns bent Fortune 500 companies to her vision. She was headstrong, unapologetically honest, and spoke truth even when it cut. And she was from a world his family had never accepted, especially his mother, Eleanor Robinson. Isaac straightened in his chair, pressing his thumb to the space between his brows. He had told himself he'd moved on, that life with Sabrina, strategic, composed, convenient, was enough. But tonight, something primal stirred in him, unbidden and undeniable. He looked up, and then he saw her, Camila Harris. She moved between tables with practiced grace, balancing a tray of wine glasses, as though she were conducting an orchestra of crystalline light. The black uniform of the restaurant clung to her form, and his breath stilled as his gaze fell upon her midsection. Rounded, unmistakably so. She was pregnant, at least 7 months by the look of her. Isaac's pulse pounded his throat dry. He began counting backward. Their divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, but finality on paper had meant nothing in practice. There had been late nights, lingering touches, one last unraveling of love into something raw and physical. Could it be his? The thought struck him with the force of an earthquake. His phone buzzed again. Sabrina was calling this time, but he didn't answer. Couldn't. Not now. Not when every bone in his body felt frozen in place. Camila's face was more tired now, carved by exhaustion, her once laughing curls pulled into a simple ponytail. But the beauty, no, the fire remained. She moved with poise, her smile faint, but unbroken, a mask worn for affluent strangers who never saw her truth. And she didn't look at him, not once. Her tray never wavered, her professionalism unyielding. But Isaac noticed the small things, the way her hand pressed gently against her lower back, the fatigue in her step, the protective palm against her belly. It was then that Isaac realized he had a choice. He could look away, pretend she was invisible, pretend the past had truly ended. Or he could rise, face her, face himself. The clock above the bar chimed softly, but it sounded like thunder to Isaac. This wasn't just another evening at La Vienne. This was the beginning of a reckoning. And he knew for the first time in years that he could not walk away. If you've been drawn into Isaac and Camila's world, the opulence of La Vienne, the shock of recognition, the weight of what still lingers, then tell me, what would you do in his place? Would you rise to meet the past or turn away from it forever? Your thoughts matter. Share them in the comments below, because stories like this live in words and the conversations they spark. And if this moment stirred something in you, if you felt the hush of the chandeliers, the sting of memory in a familiar scent, don't forget to like this video. It's the simplest way to tell us, yes, keep going. I want to know what happens next. Follow our channel, because Isaac and Camila's journey is only beginning, and the chapters ahead, trust me, you won't want to miss them. The hum of La Vienne carried on, oblivious to the storm unraveling at the corner table. Crystal glasses chimed, laughter murmured, and forks scraped porcelain plates with delicate precision. The city glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to the reckoning unfolding beneath its lights. Isaac Robinson sat frozen, the stem of his water glass clenched loosely between his fingers, untouched. His eyes were locked across the room, tracing the lines of a woman he once called wife. Camila Harris. She moved as though nothing had shifted, as though her world were steady, though Isaac could see every small detail that betrayed otherwise. The faint shadow beneath her eyes, the slight arch of her back, as she balanced the tray against her growing belly, the practiced smile that revealed nothing real. He remembered that smile. It was the same one she wore when his mother made her feel invisible at a family gala, when Eleanor Robinson's cutting remarks reduced Camila's ambition to spirited distractions. Camila had smiled then, too, professional, composed, untouchable. But later in their brownstone's kitchen, her tears had fallen silently into the sink as she scrubbed the remnants of catered hors d'oeuvres from porcelain dishes. Isaac's throat tightened. That same smile was on her face now. 7 months. The realization rolled through him again, relentless. He did not need a calendar to calculate. He knew. He remembered the night with brutal clarity, the one that had stretched until dawn, when neither of them had been able to let go, despite divorce papers waiting in the morning. If his math was correct, the child she carried could be his. His heart beat louder, every thud, ricocheting like a hammer in his chest. Camila set the tray down at a nearby table, her voice soft and professional as she recited the wine's vintage. Her hands were steady, her posture impeccable, and yet from her periphery she had seen him. She knew the cut of his shoulders before her eyes confirmed it. She knew the slight curl of his mouth when he read a text, the subtle tap of his index finger against a glass when he was lost in thought. Isaac Robinson was not just a memory. He was a shape branded into her very bones. And he was here. Her breath caught once a fleeting falter before she steadied herself. The tray didn't tremble. Her smile didn't waver. She had promised herself long ago that if she ever saw him again, she would be fortress, not ruin. But promises made in strength often fracture under the weight of longing. At his table, Isaac pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose, a headache threatening. He could feel the edges of guilt clawing their way into him. Guilt for the silence he had allowed, the emails he had ignored, and the messages his assistant had intercepted on his instruction. He remembered them now, clearer than he wished. Isaac, I need a moment. Please. It matters. And the last one, the one he had never opened until it was too late. I'm pregnant. It's yours. You should know. He had buried it under deals and champagne toasts, convincing himself distance was strength. He had told Sarah to filter her calls to protect him from entanglements that might slow him down. At the time, he believed it necessary. Now the choice rotted in his chest like poison. Across the room, Camila placed an empty tray against the service station and reached for polished glasses. The movements were mechanical routine, yet her fingers brushed against the curve of her belly, as though instinct sought to protect what grew inside her. Isaac rose. The scrape of his chair against marble drew a few curious glances, but he didn't care. He crossed the floor slowly, deliberately, each step calculated not to betray the tremor building beneath his composure. Camila sensed him before he stopped near her station. She did not lift her head at first, but when she finally did, their eyes met. For 2 heartbeats, the world around them dissolved. Her gaze was unreadable, calm, measured, but not indifferent. It carried the weight of 1,000 nights left unanswered, the silence of a man who once held her heart and then let it fall to the ground. Camila. He breathed the word, catching on his lips like a confession. Her jaw tightened. Mr. Robinson. Can I get you anything? The formality of her tone struck him harder than any insult. She had stripped him of intimacy with those 2 syllables, yet he heard something else beneath the steel of her voice. Fragility, a note she fought to hide. Isaac leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. We need to talk. Her smile remained professional, but her eyes flashed. This is neither the place nor the time. Then when his voice carried a quiet desperation he hadn't meant to expose. 7 months ago, he stopped himself. His words threatened to tumble out too raw too soon. Camila's lips pressed into a line. She turned away, reaching for a stack of plates, as though the clatter of porcelain could shield her. Isaac's hand twitched at his side. He wanted to reach for her arm, ground her, and demand the truth. but he knew her well enough to recognize that force would only build the walls higher. "Camila," he said again, softer now. "Please." Her breath hitched just slightly. Then she steadied herself and walked away, leaving him rooted in place. Back at his table, Isaac sank into his chair, every muscle taut with restrained urgency. His phone buzzed once more. Sabrina again. He silenced it, sliding the device face down on the tablecloth. Tonight, the empire could wait. The boardroom could wait. Sabrina could wait. Camila could not. From across the room, he watched her return to the rhythm of service, her movements efficient, her mask unbroken. But he noticed what others did not. The faint heaviness in her steps, the way she lingered at the bar's edge for half a second longer than necessary, the exhaustion she tried so hard to veil. And beneath it all, the swell of her belly. Isaac's chest tightened. The thought of her carrying that weight alone was unbearable. The idea that she had been going to appointments without him waking in the night, without his hand to steady her whispering comfort to a child he might never know, it split him open. He remembered her laughter in their brownstone kitchen barefoot at midnight, with Miles Davis on the record player. He remembered the mornings she stole his shirts and brewed coffee while humming under her breath. He remembered the rain-soaked night of their last fight, her voice shaking as she accused him of hiding her when the world was watching. "You love me in private, Isaac, but in public I'm invisible." And he had been silent. Silence, he thought at the time, was peace. In truth, it was betrayal. Now that silence sat across the room from him, carrying a child, serving tables, refusing to look at him again. Camila carried another tray to a table dangerously close to Isaac's corner. She could feel his gaze on her skin prickling like static. She hated how much she still recognized it. Her hands trembled though the tray did not. She poured wine, accepted compliments with faint smiles, and turned to leave. But in that turn her eyes caught his. It was only a second, maybe two. But it was enough. The world narrowed the chatter of Manhattan's elite, dissolving into silence. For those 2 seconds, no Vienna chandeliers or city was beyond the glass. Only Isaac, only Camila. His eyes looked haunted, raw. Her own betrayed more than she intended pain, but something softer beneath it. A fragment of what had once been love, now buried under too many layers of disappointment. Isaac rose halfway, as if to go to her to say anything. But Camila turned away first. Not with anger, not with cruelty, just with purpose. She would not unravel here. Not in front of him. Not in front of the world. Camila leaned briefly against the counter at the service station, steadying her breath. Betty, the older waitress, gave her a look of quiet concern. "You all right, sugar?" Camila nodded, her voice clipped. "Just tired." Betty didn't press, but her eyes softened with the understanding only years of surviving could teach. Camila inhaled deeply, then exhaled. Her hands brushed over her belly, feeling the slight flutter beneath her palm. The baby shifted, a gentle reminder that she was not alone, even when loneliness pressed its heaviest weight. She whispered so softly no one else could hear. "It's okay, little one. We're just fine." But the crack in her chest told a different story. Isaac remained seated, but his resolve sharpened. He had run from silence for too long. Tonight, silence would no longer be his refuge. If she wouldn't face him on the floor of La Vienne, then he would wait, however long it took. Because some truths could no longer be ignored. Not by him, not by her. Not when a child's heartbeat pulsed between them. And so Isaac Robinson, the man who once measured life in skyscrapers and contracts, now measured it in minutes. Minutes until Camila Harris had her break. Minutes until he could finally speak the words that had lived like shadows in his chest. The service bell chimed faintly as another order slid across the kitchen counter. Servers rushed in and out, with the precision of a ballet, balancing trays, heavy with oysters, champagne, and roasted duck. Amid the orchestrated chaos, Camila Harris glanced at the clock above the swinging door. 10 minutes until her break. Her body ached, her feet swollen from hours of walking her back, screaming under the weight she carried. Yet the deeper ache was not physical. It lived in her chest, in the steady thrum of awareness that Isaac Robinson waited only yards away. Watching. She had told herself she would not unravel. She would serve him like any other patron, invisible as a shadow. But Isaac had never been like any other man, and shadows, she realized bitterly, could not hide from the light. She carried one last tray to a corner table and excused herself to Betty, who nodded knowingly. "Breathe, sugar. You look pale." Camila slipped through the narrow hallway, the hum of the dining room fading behind her. The employees' lounge was small, fluorescent lit, and mercifully empty. She lowered herself onto the worn leather bench and pressed her palms to her stomach, closing her eyes. The baby shifted beneath her touch, a soft flutter that grounded her. "It's just us," she whispered. "We'll be fine. We don't need him." But even as she said it, her throat tightened. The door creaked open. She didn't have to look up to know. Isaac Robinson filled the tall and immovable doorway, as though the walls bent to accommodate him. Gone was the mask of the boardroom magnate, the polished charm of Manhattan's most sought-after billionaire. What stood before her now was a man stripped raw, his eyes carrying shadows of nights he had buried too deep. "Camila," he said softly. Her heart lurched, traitorous. She steadied her breath before answering, her tone sharp. "This room's for staff only." His jaw flexed, but he didn't step back. "I'm not here as a patron." "Then what are you?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Because last I checked, you're the man who signed divorce papers and disappeared." Isaac flinched, though barely. Still, she saw it the way her words sliced into him. He closed the door behind him and moved closer, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of his cologne drifted toward her, faint yet devastatingly familiar cedarwood and bergamot, a fragrance that once clung to her pillow long after he left for the office. "I didn't disappear," he said. His voice was low but strained. "I thought giving you space was what you wanted." Camila laughed bitterly. "Space. That's what you call ignoring calls, deleting my messages, pretending I didn't exist." Her hand trembled against her belly, and she pressed it tighter, as though shielding more than just herself. Isaac's gaze dropped to the swell of her stomach. His breath hitched audibly. "Camila," his voice cracked. "Is it mine?" The question hung between them, heavy as iron. Camila's spine straightened, her eyes hardening. "That's none of your concern." His chest tightened. "Don't say that. Please. I need to know." She rose slowly from the bench, her posture regale, despite the exhaustion in her limbs. Standing before him now, she was fragile and fierce, a woman carved by survival. "You need to know." Her voice quivered with restrained fury. "Where was that need when I went to the first appointment alone? I wondered how I'd do this without help when I couldn't sleep at night. You needed to know, Isaac. You knew. I told you. And you chose silence." Her words struck like glass, shattering. He remembered the message, the one he had seen, then buried under work and pride. The weight of his mistake pressed against him, now suffocating. "I was wrong," he whispered. "God, Camila, I was so bad." For a moment, her eyes softened, the crack of vulnerability breaking through. But just as quickly, she rebuilt the wall. "You don't get to say that now." Isaac's chest burned. He wanted to reach for her, trace the curve of her face, and promise her everything he had once denied. But he knew promises from him would sound like betrayal. Instead, he let the silence stretch, then spoke carefully. I can't change what I did, or didn't do. But if that child is mine, I won't walk away. Camila's lips parted, her breath sharp. For a second, she looked as though she might believe him. Then she shook her head. You walked away once. What's to stop you from doing it again? When my skin doesn't fit into your mother's dinner parties. Whispers follow us through Fifth Avenue galas. When the pressure gets too heavy. Her voice broke, though her stare remained unflinching. I won't let this child feel unwanted. Not by you. Not by anyone. Isaac swallowed hard. He remembered his mother's voice, calm, aristocratic, slicing through the night after their first gala as husband and wife. She'll never fit, Isaac. She's not one of us. And he had done nothing. The memory hollowed him. You're right, he admitted, his voice gravelly. I should have stood by you. I should have defended us. I failed you, Camila. But I won't forget again. Not you, not the baby. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. She turned away quickly, brushing her cheek with the back of her hand. Don't, she whispered. Don't say things you can't keep. Isaac stepped closer, closing the space between them. His hand hovered near her arm, hesitant, as though seeking permission. For years he had commanded boardrooms, built empires, and made decisions worth billions without flinching. Yet now asking for the right to touch her felt like the most terrifying risk of his life. Camila didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. The silence stretched. The hum of the kitchen outside seemed miles away. Finally, she whispered so softly it nearly broke him. Why now, Isaac? Why come back now? He exhaled the truth raw. Because I saw you, and I realized what I lost, what I still love. Her breath caught a sharp intake she couldn't disguise. For a heartbeat, the fortress crumbled. She looked at him, eyes wide, lips trembling. Then, just as quickly, she rebuilt. Love isn't enough, she said firmly. Not this time. 7:20. The door swung open suddenly, and Betty stepped in, freezing at the sight of Isaac towering near Camila. Her eyes narrowed, protective. Everything all right in here? She asked, her tone laced with suspicion. Camila wiped her cheek, quickly nodding. I'm fine. Just needed a moment. Isaac stepped back, forcing composure. I was leaving. His eyes lingered on Camila for a fraction longer, then he moved past Betty and slipped out the door. Camila sank back onto the bench, her strength unraveling when he was gone. Betty set a gentle hand on her shoulder. That man trouble. Camila let out a shaky laugh, though no humor touched it, something like that. Betty's gaze dropped to her belly, then back to her face. Her voice softened. Don't let him break you again, sugar. You've got more than yourself to think about now. Camila nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. I know. But even as she said it, her heart betrayed her because she felt the faint flicker of hope for the first time in months. And hope she knew was dangerous. Isaac leaned against the cool marble wall outside the lounge, his fists clenched at his sides. His pulse thundered, his chest heavy. He had faced Camila tonight. He had seen the fire in her eyes, the pain in her words. And he knew the road ahead would not be simple. But as he replayed the image of her hand resting protectively over her belly, one truth crystallized within him. He could not walk away. Not this time. The rain fell in a thin veil across the city, blurring the neon lights and draping New York in silver melancholy. At 5 a.m, the streets of Harlem were still save for the occasional bus groaning to life. Camila Harris stirred awake inside a modest walk-up apartment, tucked between a bakery and a laundromat. Her back ached before her eyes opened. The pregnancy weighed on her bones, pressing her into the mattress that sagged beneath years of use. She shifted slowly, wincing, and pushed herself upright. A pale blue light seeped through the blinds, catching the faint sheen of moisture at the corners of her eyes. She sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, one hand resting on her stomach. The baby shifted faintly under her touch, a reminder that she was never truly alone, even in the loneliest hours. "Good morning, little one," she whispered. The words trembled tender but fragile. Her apartment was small, 2 rooms and a kitchen, barely large enough to hold a table. The wallpaper peeled in places, water stains creeping like shadows across the ceiling. But it was hers, a place she could claim after leaving the brownstone where silence had swallowed her whole. Camila padded across the worn wooden floor, making her way to the kitchen. She filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and waited as steam curled against the cool air. Her reflection in the window startled her. She looked older than 32, her once bright eyes carrying the weight of sleepless nights and endless double shifts. She reached for the small tin of tea leaves, a gift from Betty, who had insisted she needed something warm after long nights at La Vienne. As the water boiled, she let herself remember just for a moment. Isaac's rare and unguarded laughter echoed through their brownstone when she'd teased him about mispronouncing her grandmother's southern recipes. The way his hand had always found hers beneath the table, even when his mother's eyes cut sharply across the dining room. The nights they danced barefoot in the kitchen, music spilling from an old speaker, love wrapping around them like silk. Her throat tightened. She pressed her palm hard against the counter, steadying herself. Those memories were dangerous. They softened her when she needed to be strong. By 7, she was dressed in her uniform again, hair pulled into a neat bun, apron folded neatly in her bag. She moved slowly, carefully conscious of the curve of her belly. When she glanced in the mirror before leaving, she hardly recognized herself, a woman poised, professional, but with shadows that no powder could hide beneath her eyes. On the street, the air was sharp and rainy. She tightened her coat around her and started toward the subway. The city was waking, indifferent to her quiet battle. As she descended into the station, she noticed him. Isaac. He stood at the far end of the platform, tall and unmistakable, his navy coat tailored to perfection, hair damp from the drizzle. He wasn't reading his phone, wasn't lost in thought. He was watching her. Camila froze, heart hammering. She considered turning back, fleeing up the stairs, but pride rooted her feet to the ground. She would not give him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply his presence unsettled her. She walked forward, each step deliberate, her chin lifted. She stopped a few feet from him, her expression cool. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, sharp enough to cut. Isaac's gaze softened. "Making sure you got here safe." Her laugh was bitter. "I've been doing just fine without you." The train screeched into the station doors, sliding open. Camila stepped inside without another word. But when she glanced back, she saw him follow. At La Vienne, the rhythm of the day began again. The chandeliers glittered, the polished tables gleamed, and the hum of wealthy patrons filled the air. Camila tied her apron and slipped into her role, her expression smooth as porcelain. But she felt him. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps his meetings were nearby. Maybe he craved the restaurant's famed cuisine. Yet as days passed, his presence became a quiet certainty. Isaac Robinson was always there. Sometimes at a corner table, laptop open but eyes wandering. Sometimes by the bar, his gaze followed her discreetly, never intruding nor demanding. Just watching, waiting, a shadow she could not shake. The staff began to whisper. Betty teased her once, nudging her shoulder. "That man's got a look that could burn holes through marble." "You sure you don't know him?" Camila forced a smile. "He's just a customer." But at night, when she lay awake listening to the rain against her window, she remembered the truth in his eyes. He wasn't there for La Vienne. He was there for her. One evening, exhaustion claimed her mid-shift. She had been balancing plates when a sudden wave of dizziness washed over her. The tray wobbled in her hands. Before she could steady it, Isaac was there. His hand caught the tray, his arm bracing her elbow. The restaurant's hum faltered as eyes turned toward them. "You should sit down," he murmured, his voice low but urgent. "I'm fine," she snapped, pulling away, cheeks burning. But Betty was already at her side, guiding her toward the service station. "Go rest, sugar. You don't look well." Camila sat, her pride burning hotter than the dizziness. Isaac lingered nearby. Silent, his presence a tether she couldn't sever. 7:20. Later that night, when she returned to her apartment, a bag waited at her door. She frowned, glancing up and down the hall. No one was there. Inside, she found vitamins, prenatal supplements, and a pair of supportive shoes for long hours on her feet. A simple note rested at the bottom. "For you. For the baby." There was no signature, but she knew. Her chest tightened. She wanted to throw the bag away, to reject the intrusion. But when her hand touched the shoes, the weight of her swollen feet reminded her how much she needed them. Tears burned her eyes. The days blurred into one another, each carrying Isaac's shadow. He never forced his way into her life, never demanded. He lingered at the edges, watching, waiting. And despite herself, Camila began to feel it, an unspoken care, a presence that pressed against the walls she had built. One evening, as she left the restaurant, she found him waiting outside beneath the awning. Rain poured around him, soaking the city in silver sheets. He held an umbrella, but his coat was already damp. "Camila," he said softly. She hesitated, exhaustion pulling at her bones. "What do you want from me?" His eyes searched hers, unflinching. "A chance. To be here. To try." The rain thundered, drowning the silence between them. For a moment she felt the years slip away, the nights of laughter, the warmth of his hand on hers, the love they had once known. But then she remembered the silence that had followed, the cold distance, the abandonment. "You don't get to try on your terms," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Not anymore." She turned, stepping into the rain. The drops soaked through her coat, plastering her hair to her skin. She didn't look back. But Isaac stood there still, the umbrella hanging uselessly at his side, his gaze following her into the storm. That night, Camila lay awake, the sound of rain against her window, a steady drum. Her hand rested over her stomach, feeling the faint rhythm of life within. Her heart ached with longing and fear, with anger and fragile hope. Isaac had been wrong before. He had left her alone in the shadows. But now he seemed unwilling to leave, and that terrified her more than his silence ever had. Because if he stayed, if he truly stayed, her heart might remember how to believe in him again. And she wasn't sure she could survive that. The hospital waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee on the burner too long. The chairs were molded plastic, and the walls were painted in muted tones meant to soothe, but they only reminded Camila Harris of how stark this place was. She sat alone, her coat draped across her lap, one hand curved protectively over her stomach. Her name had been called 15 minutes ago. She had nodded politely to the nurse, gathered her things, and followed down a hall where posters lined the walls. Smiling mothers, cradled infants, promises of safe beginnings. Now she sat in a small exam room, the hum of the fluorescent light buzzing above her, waiting for Dr. Marshall. She had grown used to this silence, to being alone in the moments meant to be shared. She told herself she didn't mind, that she didn't need anyone. But a hollow ache pressed in as her gaze fell to the empty chair beside her. The knock on the door startled her. She straightened, expecting the doctor. But it wasn't. Isaac Robinson stepped inside. Camila froze, her pulse hammering. "What are you doing here?" He looked nervous, a rarity in a man who commanded skyscrapers and boardrooms. "Betty told me. About your appointment. I wanted to be here." Her jaw tightened. "You had no right." Isaac swallowed his eyes, flicking to the chair beside her, then back. "Maybe not, but I couldn't stay away." Before she could respond, Dr. Marshall entered her presence, brisk but warm. "Camila, good morning. And you must be—" She glanced at Isaac with a polite smile. "No one," Camila said quickly, her voice clipped. Isaac flinched, but said nothing. The doctor continued as though she hadn't noticed. "Let's check on baby today, shall we?" Camila lay back on the exam table, her heart pounding. Isaac moved closer, standing at the foot of the bed, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. He tried to look composed, but his eyes betrayed him. They were fixed on her, soft and reverent, as though she were made of something fragile and sacred. The gel was cold against her skin. The doctor pressed the probe, gently sliding it across the curve of her stomach. Then the sound filled the room. A heartbeat. Strong. Steady. Isaac's breath caught his eyes, widening. For a moment, his polished facade shattered. He stepped forward, almost involuntarily, drawn by the rhythm that pulsed through the speakers. "That's—" His voice broke. "That's our baby." Camila closed her eyes, tears pricking. She hadn't wanted this. She hadn't wanted to share this moment with him. But the sound filled her, wrapped her in warmth and terror. "Yes," she whispered. "That's the baby." Isaac's hand hovered in the air, as though reaching for her, then curled back into a fist. "Camila, it's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." Her throat tightened. She turned her face away, unwilling to let him see the tears on her cheeks. After the appointment, she walked briskly through the hospital corridors, her coat clutched tightly around her. Isaac followed his longer strides, easily keeping pace. "Camila, wait." She spun on him, her eyes flashing. "You had no right to be there. That was my moment. Mine." Isaac's expression was raw, unguarded. "It's ours. Please don't shut me out." Her voice trembled with fury. "You shut yourself out, Isaac. You chose silence. You chose pride. And now you show up thinking you can erase months of pain with a single heartbeat." He flinched. "I don't want to erase it. I want to make up for it." Camila's laughter was bitter sharp. "Make up for it? Do you think vitamin shoes and showing up uninvited will erase the nights I cry myself to sleep? The mornings I dragged myself to work, wondering how I would afford diapers? You left me alone when I needed you most. Why should I ever trust you again?" Isaac stepped closer, his voice breaking, "Because I can't live with what I did. I knew I was not walking away again when I heard that heartbeat." Camila's lips parted, her breath sharp, but she quickly shook her head. "Words, Isaac. That's all they are. Words." She turned and strode out into the gray drizzle of the city, leaving him behind. That night, Camila sat at her small kitchen table, the ultrasound photo resting in front of her. She traced the faint outline with trembling fingers. The heartbeat still echoed in her ears, haunting and beautiful. But so did Isaac's words. She pressed her palms against her face, willing herself not to believe, not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had broken her before. And yet when she closed her eyes, she saw him standing there, eyes wide, undone by a sound that had changed everything. Isaac, meanwhile, sat in the back of his limousine, the city lights blurring past the window. The ultrasound photo he had begged the nurse to print lay in his hands. He stared at it, his chest heavy with something unfamiliar. He had closed billion-dollar deals, stood at the helm of empires, and worn power like a second skin. Yet nothing had ever felt as monumental as that small flicker of life on a black-and-white screen. He thought of Camila's face, the tears she had tried to hide the fury in her voice. He had hurt her, deeply, perhaps beyond repair. But he could not let that be the end of their story. Not now. Not when love still burned in the shadows between them. 720. The following week, Camila walked out of La Vienne late at night, exhaustion clinging to her limbs. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting the golden glow of the street lamps. She pulled her coat tighter, bracing against the chill. A car idled by the curb. A familiar silhouette stepped out. Camila, Isaac said softly. She stiffened. Not tonight. I don't have the strength. He held up his hands as though surrendering. I don't want to fight. I want to walk you home. I don't need you to. I know. But I want to. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion sharp. And if I say no, then I'll follow from a distance to ensure you're safe. You can curse me all you like, but I'll still be here. Camila exhaled sharply, exasperation mingling with something she refused to name. She turned and began walking. After a moment, Isaac stepped beside her, his stride careful, as though trying not to intrude. They walked in silence, the rain soft against the pavement. At one point, she stumbled slightly on a crack in the sidewalk. His hand shot out, steadying her. For a heartbeat, she didn't pull away. Then she did quickly, her pride bristling. Don't. But his touch lingered in her memory long after. When they reached her building, she paused at the door, turning to him. This doesn't mean anything, she said firmly. Isaac nodded, though his eyes betrayed something deeper. Maybe not to you, but to me it means everything. Camila's breath caught. They stood in the rain for a long moment, shadows of their past pressing close. Then she turned, unlocking the door, slipping inside without another word. Isaac remained on the sidewalk, the rain soaking his coat, his gaze fixed on the closed door between them. And in the silence of the storm, he whispered to no one but himself, I'll wait as long as it takes. The season's first snow fell quietly, dusting the city in pale light. From her window, Camila Harris watched children chasing each other in the courtyard below, their laughter spilling upward like music. She envied them their freedom, their weightlessness. Her life felt heavy, every step measured against responsibility, every breath tethered to survival. Her hand rested instinctively against the swell of her stomach. The baby fluttered faintly beneath her palm, a reminder of her burden and blessing. She whispered, It's just us, little one. Just us. But even as she said it, she felt the lie. Because Isaac Robinson was everywhere. She noticed first in the most minor details. The hallway light outside her apartment, long broken, flickered back to life one evening. A week later, the lock on her front door, rusted and stubborn, suddenly turned smoothly. She hadn't called the landlord. Then came the groceries. She returned home one night after a brutal double shift to find a bag waiting outside her door, fresh produce, milk, and the prenatal vitamins she'd been rationing. No note, no signature, but she didn't need one. Camila's first instinct was anger. She didn't want his money, pity, or attempts to fix her life with the sweep of his wealth. She didn't want to be someone he saved. And yet tears pricked her eyes when she peeled an orange from that bag, the sweetness flooding her mouth after days of coffee and bread. At La Vienne, Isaac's presence had shifted too. He no longer sat in corners watching her with haunted eyes. Instead, he took quieter roles. She found him speaking softly with the maitre d', once ensuring her shifts didn't stretch past midnight. Another time, she caught him slipping a generous tip to Betty with a murmured instruction, make sure she eats during break. Camila burned with indignation, but beneath it, something softer stirred. It wasn't grand gestures he was making. It was the small, invisible ones no one else noticed, the ones she remembered. One evening, the restaurant was in chaos. A storm had grounded flights, leaving travelers stranded in the city, and La Vienne was swamped. Camila moved swiftly between tables, exhaustion gnawing at her legs. She carried 3 plates, balanced precariously, when a man in a tailored suit brushed against her. The tray tilted. For a moment, disaster loomed. And then Isaac was there. His hand shot out, steadying the tray before a single plate could fall. His other hand brushed her elbow, guiding her gently back into balance. Careful, he murmured, his voice low, intimate, heard only by her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She yanked her arm back, cheeks hot. "I don't need you." But he didn't argue. He inclined his head and stepped back into the shadows. That night, as she walked home, she felt him behind her. Not close enough to intrude, but always there, a steady presence a few paces back. At first, it infuriated her. She turned once, snapping, "Are you following me like some shadow?" Isaac's reply was quiet, almost reverent. "Not following, just making sure you're safe." She scoffed, spinning on her heel. "I've kept myself safe for months without you." "I know." His eyes softened. "But you shouldn't have had to." The words lodged deep, more dangerous than any gift. They followed her all the way home. 2 weeks later, Camila's resistance cracked, not in a dramatic confrontation, but in something painfully ordinary. It was late snow still falling when her apartment's heating faltered. The radiator clanked uselessly, the air growing colder with each passing hour. She layered blankets, wrapped herself in her coat, but the chill gnawed at her bones. By midnight, she was shivering, teeth chattering the baby, shifting restlessly. Panic coiled in her chest. She couldn't risk getting sick, not now. She reached for her phone, fingers trembling, and hovered over Betty's number. But before she could press dial, a knock echoed at her door. She froze. Camila. His voice was muffled but unmistakable. "Isaac." She hesitated, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, she opened the door. He stood with a small space heater cradled in his arms, his coat dusted with snow. His eyes scanned her, taking in her cheeks' pallor and tremble in her hands. "Your building's heating is down," he said. "I brought this." Her throat tightened. "How did you, Betty?" He admitted with a faint, guilty smile. "She worries." Camila wanted to slam the door to reject him, but the icy air coiled tighter around her. She stepped aside silently. Isaac set the heater near the wall and plugged it in. Warmth began to hum through the small apartment, chasing away the chill. For a moment, the silence between them was fragile, broken only by the soft hum of the heater. "You shouldn't be alone in this cold," he said, his voice low. "I've managed before," she murmured, crossing her arms. He looked at her, then not as a billionaire accustomed to control, but as a man stripped bare. "Camila, I know I don't deserve another chance, but let me care for you, even if it's from the edges. Please." Her chest ached. She wanted to scream at him, to push him out into the snow. Instead, she whispered, "Why now, Isaac? Why fight now when you gave up before?" His jaw tightened. He looked away, then back, eyes burning with quiet anguish. "Because I was a coward. I thought distance would protect me from the weight of what we were. But all it did was destroy us. I can't undo the past, Camila, but I can stand here in this moment and choose differently." Her breath caught. For the first time in months, she believed him, and that terrified her more than his silence ever had. The following days unfolded in delicate shifts. Isaac didn't press. He didn't demand entry into her life. Instead, he lingered at the edges, shoveling snow from her stoop before she woke, leaving fresh groceries, quietly ensuring the broken elevator was fixed before her next appointment. Each act was small, but each one chipped at the armor she had built around her heart. Camila watched him from the corner of her eye when he lingered outside the restaurant. She noticed the weariness in his posture, the way his shoulders no longer carried the arrogance of a man untouchable. She remembered the boyish grin he used to wear, when he made her laugh the way his hand had once fit perfectly against hers. And late at night, when the city was quiet and her walls were down, she let herself wonder, what if he was telling the truth? What if this time he stayed? One evening as she left La Vienne, Isaac was waiting again, snowflakes catching in his hair. She pulled her coat tighter, exhaustion weighing heavily. She said softly that you don't have to walk me home every night. I know, he replied, but I want to. For once, she didn't argue. She let him step beside her, their silence thick but not hostile. Halfway down the block, she stumbled slightly on the ice. His hand caught hers, instinctively warm and steady. This time she didn't pull away. They walked the rest of the way, like that two figures beneath the snowfall, bound not by promises or declarations, but by the fragile thread of something reborn. That night, as Camila lay in bed, the hum of the heater filling the room, she pressed her hand against her stomach. The baby kicked softly, as though answering some unspoken question. Her heart whispered what her pride refused to admit. Isaac was breaking through, and she didn't know if she was strong enough to stop him. The city was alive with winter lights. Strings of golden bulbs clung to trees along Fifth Avenue, their glow softened by the snow drifting steadily from the sky. Isaac Robinson walked beside Camila Harris, their breaths curling in clouds, their silence a language all its own. It had been weeks since the night he brought the heater, weeks since she had allowed him to walk at her side without protest. Their conversations were brief, their touches fleeting, but something had shifted. A fragile rhythm was forming, unsteady but real. Isaac felt it in the way her eyes no longer turned to stone when they met his. Camila thought it in how his steps matched hers perfectly, never rushing, never pulling ahead, as though he had finally learned the patience she had needed all along. For the first time in months, hope whispered between them. But shadows always waited at the edges of light. It began with a dinner party. Isaac hadn't wanted to attend, but obligations in his world rarely allowed escape. The Robinson family name demanded appearances at galas, fundraisers, and dinners, where polished laughter disguised the constant power exchange. His younger brother, Nathaniel Robinson, was hosting that night. Nathaniel was everything Isaac had once been: charming, ruthless, and unburdened by conscience. "You've been quiet," Nathaniel observed, as they sat in the private dining room of the Metropolitan Club, crystal chandeliers glowing overhead. "Ever since the board meeting last month, you've been distracted." Isaac sipped his Scotch, expression guarded. "Business has been demanding." Nathaniel smirked. "Business has always been demanding, but you were never the type to lose focus. So tell me, what's her name?" Isaac's jaw tightened, but silence betrayed him. Nathaniel leaned back, laughter sharp. "So it's true then. Whispers around town said my brother has been keeping company in Harlem. A waitress, no less." He savored the word like it was something bitter, and not the kind our circles approve of. Isaac's hand curled into a fist around his glass. "Enough!" But Nathaniel only grinned wider, sensing blood. "A woman like that, she'll bleed you dry. And when word gets out that she's carrying your child—" The glass shattered in Isaac's hand before Nathaniel could finish. Crimson bloomed against his palm, sharp shards glittering on the tablecloth. The room fell silent, heads turning. But Isaac didn't flinch from the pain. His voice was steady, lethal. "Say another word about her, and I will forget you're my brother." News traveled fast in Manhattan. Within days, the whispers Nathaniel had hinted at grew louder. Society pages speculated, investors muttered behind closed doors. A billionaire caught in the orbit of a woman far outside their gilded world. It was scandal enough. A child born of it. That was ammunition. Camila felt it before she heard it. At La Vienne, glances lingered longer. A woman in a fur coat whispered to her companion as Camila poured wine, their eyes raking her with disdain. Even the staff grew cautious, some curious, others resentful of the sudden attention. When Betty finally pulled her aside, worry etched in her face. Camila's stomach dropped. "They know, Cam." Betty whispered, her hands tightening around Camila's. "They know about the baby, about him." Camila's world tilted. She had fought so hard to keep her life separate to shield what was hers from the claws of gossip. Now the walls were crumbling. That night, Isaac appeared outside her apartment, his eyes dark with storm. "You heard," he said quietly. She crossed her arms, her voice trembling with fury. "You promised me, Isaac. You promised me safety. And now the whole city knows." His face hardened. "I never spoke a word. Nathaniel, he's the one who broke off running a hand through his hair. He's always despised me. He saw you as a weapon." Camila's chest ached. A weapon. "That's what I am, in your world. Something to be used against you." "No." His voice cracked raw and desperate. "You're the only thing that's real in my world, Camila. That's why they want to destroy it." Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall. "And what happens when they succeed, Isaac? When the investors pull out, when your family disowns you, when the weight of their disapproval crushes us? Do you stand, or do you disappear again?" Isaac stepped forward, gripping her shoulders. "I stand." His voice was iron. "For you. For our child. I don't care what it costs." But Camila had heard promises before, and promises had left her broken. Days turned into weeks, and the scrutiny grew sharper. Camila found herself followed on the subway, photographed at the grocery store, her swollen belly splashed across tabloids, with headlines dripping venom. Billionaires fall from boardrooms to backstreets. Vienna grew unbearable. Customers came not for dinner, but for a glimpse of the scandal. Management, once indulgent, grew cold. The maitre d' pulled her aside, his voice tight. "Perhaps it would be best if you took a leave of absence." Camila walked out that night with her dignity wrapped tight around her, but her heart trembled. Every corner of her life was shrinking, invaded. She nearly didn't open the door when Isaac came to her apartment. But when she saw his face drawn and weary, something in her cracked. "They're tearing me apart," she whispered, her voice breaking. Isaac reached for her hand, his touch firm, steady. "Then let me be your shield." For the first time, she didn't pull away, yet the world was merciless. One afternoon, as Camila left a prenatal class at the community center, two women cornered her outside. Their words were barbed, dripping with scorn. "Enjoying your little climb up the ladder," one sneered. "Must be nice trapping a man like him," the other added. Camila froze her throat tight, her hands instinctively covering her belly. And then Isaac was there. He stepped between them, his presence towering, his voice quiet but lethal. "If you value your dignity, you'll walk away." The woman faltered, retreating under the weight of his stare. Camila looked at him, her chest aching. "You can't always be here," she whispered. Isaac turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Then I'll ensure you never need to fear when I'm not." That night, he drove her to his penthouse for the first time in months. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, glittering and cold. Camila stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself. "This isn't my world, Isaac." He came to stand beside her, his reflection tall and solemn in the glass. "It could be if you let it." Her laugh was brittle. "Do you think chandeliers and marble floors will make me forget how your world looks at me?" Isaac turned gently, tilting her chin so her eyes met his. "No." but maybe my love will." Camila's breath caught. For a moment, the city disappeared, leaving only the two bound by pain and hope. And though she said nothing, her lips pressed into silence. Her eyes betrayed her. She wanted to believe him. Snow fell in soft, heavy sheets, muting the city's noise, until Manhattan felt like a world suspended in glass. Inside the penthouse, the silence was almost fragile. Camila Harris sat curled on the edge of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, one hand resting against the gentle curve of her belly. Across the room, Isaac Robinson poured 2 cups of tea, his movements quiet, deliberate, as though afraid sound might shatter the fragile peace between them. When he carried the steaming porcelain cup to her, she hesitated before accepting it. Their fingers brushed brief but charged, and something in her chest clenched. "Chamomile," he said softly, taking the seat across from her. "Good for sleep." She stared at him, at the man who had once been her everything, and then her nothing, and now sat again in the fragile in-between. "You remember," she murmured. His eyes met hers, steady and aching. "I never forgot." The warmth of the tea seeped into her palms, but it was not enough to quiet the storm inside. She hated herself for being here in his world again. She hated the vulnerability of needing the refuge he offered, the safety that came with his presence. But more than that, she hated how her heart still betrayed her. For weeks, Isaac had lingered at the edges of her life. Small gestures, quiet protection, whispered promises. And though her pride resisted, her soul was starving for it. For him. Why now, Isaac? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Why fight for me now, when you let me go so easily? Before his jaw tightened, as though the weight of the truth was almost unbearable. He leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees, his voice low because I was a coward. Because I thought loving you meant losing everything else. And I thought I couldn't afford that. He swallowed his gaze, never leaving hers. But when you walked away, I realized you were everything. Without you, there was nothing left worth keeping. Her chest ached, each word carving through walls she had fought to build. "Do you know how much it destroyed me?" she whispered. "Carrying this child, working double shifts, fighting every day to breathe. And knowing you chose silence." Isaac's face broke, then grief etched in every line. He shifted forward, his hand reaching the distance between them, hovering just short of hers. "I know," he said hoarsely, "and it's the one sin I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone for, if you'll let me." Camila looked down at his hand, which once held hers in warmth and promise. Her heart screamed to close the space to let him anchor her again. But fear rooted her still. The night stretched on. They spoke quietly at first, about small things, the baby's restless kicks, the cravings she tried to ignore, the exhaustion that never seemed to end. Isaac listened intently, as though every word was sacred, as though her weariness was a burden he longed to lift. Then the silence shifted heavier now, pulling them into deeper waters. "Do you ever think about what it could have been?" Camila asked, suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. "If you hadn't walked away." Isaac exhaled slowly, his gaze distant every day. "I see flashes of the life we should have had. Your laughter in this apartment. Our child's toys scattered across the floor mornings, that begin with your face instead of empty glass walls. It haunts me." Her throat tightened. She had imagined the same in lonely moments when the world grew too heavy. But to hear it from him, it was unbearable and beautiful all at once. "And if it happens again?" she asked, her voice sharp, now trembling with anger and fear. "If the weight of your world crushes you again, if the whispers become too loud, if your family forces you to choose," Isaac's reply came without hesitation, a vow forged in fire. Then I choose you. Every time. Even if it costs me everything else. Something broke open in her then. Her walls, built of betrayal and grief, cracked under the force of his certainty. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting, before she could stop them. She turned away, ashamed of the weakness and truth pouring out of her. But Isaac was there, rising from his chair, crossing the space between them. He knelt before her, his hand brushing the tears from her face with a tenderness that unraveled her. "Don't hide from me," he whispered. "Not anymore." Camila's breath caught her vision blurred. She wanted to push him away, to cling to the safety of anger. But instead, she let herself fall, her forehead pressed against his shoulder, her body shaking with sobs she had swallowed for months. His arms wrapped around her carefully, like she were fragile and irreplaceable. And for the first time in too long, she let herself rest there. Hours passed in that fragile embrace. When the tears quieted, they stayed close, neither daring to break the spell. Isaac's hand rested gently against her back, warmth seeping into her. Camila closed her eyes, listening to his heart's steady rhythm, which had once been her home. "You don't have to decide now," he murmured. "You don't have to forgive me tonight. Just let me be here. Let me love you in whatever way you'll allow." She pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his. There was no arrogance, no demand, only a man stripped of power, offering himself with nothing but sincerity. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against his jaw, rough with the shadow of stubble. "I want to believe you," she whispered, "but belief doesn't erase the past." His lips curved, sorrowful but certain. "No, but it could build a future." Later, as dawn began to seep through the city skyline, Camila found herself still in his arms. Exhaustion pulling her into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. Isaac held her, watching the light grow. His world beyond these walls. His brother. The investors. The whispers felt far away. All that mattered was the woman resting against him, the life they had created together, the fragile and fleeting chance they might not break this time. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple, his voice a vow only the morning could hear. "I won't lose you again." Camila stirred hours later, the city already alive below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the weight of scandal and fear. She only felt warmth and heard the quiet hum of safety. But reality always returned. She sat up slowly, her hand brushing her belly. Isaac watched her, his eyes full of questions he didn't ask. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice quiet from last night. He smiled faintly. "There's nothing to thank me for." But there was. She had felt whole for the first time since her world had fractured. And though she wasn't ready to name it, a seed had been planted in the quiet between storms. The morning sun spilled across Manhattan, gilding the towers in fire. But light quickly turned to ash inside the Robinson empire. At the head office of Robinson Global Holdings, a silence hung thick in the boardroom. The men and women around the table shifted in their seats, eyes flickering to Isaac Robinson waiting. On the screen at the room's far end, red numbers bled across financial graphs, stocks plummeting, investors withdrawing. It had begun with a whisper in the press, a rumor about Isaac's reckless entanglement. His liabilities. That whisper had grown into a roar, fueled by rivals and gleeful tabloids. Now it was tangible contracts, suspended investors demanding answers, trust dissolving. Isaac, the CFO, said carefully, his voice low, "The market is spooked. If this continues for another quarter, we risk insolvency on key ventures. The board is unsettled." Unsettled, Nathaniel Robinson repeated, leaning back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. "That's a generous word. The truth is, they've lost faith in you. Isaac's eyes cut to his brother, sharp as glass. Careful, Nathaniel. But Nathaniel only smiled wider, savoring the storm. You tied yourself to her, and this is the cost. Investors don't like scandal, and they certainly don't like distractions. The word was a dagger. Isaac's hand tightened on the table's edge. He saw the looks exchanged around him, saw the silent agreement. Camila wasn't just his secret anymore. She was the fracture line in everything he had built. That evening, Camila found him standing at the window of his penthouse, the city sprawling beneath him like a battlefield. His shoulders were rigid, his glass untouched on the table. "Bad day?" she asked gently, though the tension in his body already told her everything. Isaac turned his eyes, shadowed. "The board is circling. Investors are pulling out. My brother is waiting for me to fall." She moved closer, her hands folding over the swell of her belly. "Because of me." "No." His voice was sharp, immediate. He crossed the room, taking her hands in his. "Because they're cowards. Because they measure a man's worth by the company he keeps, and they don't understand that the only thing keeping me standing right now is you." Camila's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him and carry the weight he pressed into her words. But fear gnawed at her edges. "If you lose everything, if they strip this empire from you, will you regret me?" Isaac's grip tightened fierce. "I'd regret a life without you far more." The days that followed were brutal. Headlines screamed across every paper, Robinson and freefall billionaire's empire at risk. Cameras lingered at every entrance to the penthouse, every sidewalk Camila dared to walk. Her face, body, and existence became fodder for strangers' judgments. At the market, a woman brushed past her with a muttered "gold digger." On the subway, two men snickered, their eyes cruel, their laughter louder than the train's roar. Each moment carved deeper into her spirit until she returned to the penthouse one evening, trembling, her grocery bag slipping from her fingers as tears finally fell. Isaac caught her, steadying her as bruised apples rolled across the floor. His heart twisted at the sight of her breaking. "Camila," he whispered, his hand cupping her face. "I can't breathe out there," she sobbed. "They look at me like I'm nothing, like I don't belong in your shadow." Isaac pulled her into his arms, fierce and protective. "Then let me burn their world down if I have to. You belong with me, Camila, always." But the storm was relentless. One night, a gala invitation arrived. Mandatory, Nathaniel insisted. A chance, he claimed, for Isaac to reassure investors. Camila wanted to refuse to hide, but Isaac refused to let her shrink. "You are not a scandal," he said firmly, brushing her cheek. "You are the woman I love, the mother of my child. If they cannot see that, let them choke on their blindness. But you will not hide." And so on a cold evening, glittering with frost, Camila stepped beside him into the lion's den. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers and polished marble, every eye turning the moment they entered. Isaac's arm wrapped around her waist, firm and grounding, but she could feel the weight of their gaze. Curiosity, disdain, envy, hatred. Nathaniel approached, champagne in hand, his smile ablaze. "Ah, the woman of the hour." He drawled, his eyes raking over Camila with calculated cruelty. "Do you find it difficult to dine in places like this after La Vienne?" Isaac stiffened, but Camila lifted her chin, her voice calm, though her pulse raced. "I find it difficult only when I'm surrounded by men who mistake cruelty for wit." The silence that followed was sharp as crystal. For the first time, Nathaniel faltered, his smirk twitching. Isaac's pride flared in his chest. This was the woman they would never break. But later, when the music swelled and the crowd dispersed, Isaac saw the strain in her eyes, the fatigue in her shoulders. He guided her to a quiet balcony, the city cold and endless beyond. Snowflakes clung to her hair, her breath visible in the night. "You were extraordinary tonight," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her lips trembled. "I don't know how long I can keep being extraordinary, Isaac." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking gently. "Then lean on me. You don't have to be strong alone." Her eyes searched his, desperate, uncertain. "And if leaning on you brings everything crashing down," Isaac's voice was steady, fierce, "then let it crash. Because what we have is worth more than every brick of that empire." Back at the penthouse that night, Camila lay awake long after Isaac had fallen asleep beside her. She watched the steady rise and fall of his chest, the man who carried the weight of empires, and held her as though she were the only world that mattered. And for the first time, she wondered if love could survive the ruins. Could it rebuild from ashes? Could it endure when the glass towers fell, leaving only earth beneath them? Her hand drifted to her belly, feeling the faint flutter of life within. Their child. Their chance. The dark swallowed her whisper. Please let it be enough. The next morning, the news broke. A hostile takeover bid. Rival corporations circling like vultures. Once unshakable. Robinson Global Holdings is now trembling on the edge of collapse. Isaac stood at the window again, his reflection fractured against the glass. Camila came to his side, her hand finding his. For once he didn't hide the fear in his eyes, and she, despite her trembling, squeezed his hand tighter, because love was fragile, as it was. It had begun to grow roots in the cracks. The storm had broken. For weeks the Robinson empire had teetered on the edge of collapse, but it finally fell on this cold winter morning. Headlines screamed across every screen. Robinson Global Holdings loses majority stake. Nathaniel Robinson takes control in hostile coup. Isaac stood in the center of his office as men and women filed past him, their eyes carefully averted, as though watching a king dethroned was too dangerous, too intimate. The skyscraper that bore his name no longer belonged to him. His empire, his life's work, was gone. But when the last of them left, when silence swallowed the marble floors, he felt no relief, no despair, only clarity. Because Camila was waiting. At the penthouse, Camila sat in the soft glow of lamplight, her hands folded over her belly. The city roared outside, but inside, there was only stillness. She looked up as Isaac entered his shoulders, heavy, but his eyes fierce alive. "It's done," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "Isaac." He crossed the room in 3 strides, sinking onto the sofa beside her, his hands capturing hers. "They can take the buildings, the stock, the boardrooms. They can strip my name from the skyline. But they cannot take you. They cannot take us." Tears welled in her eyes, and she pressed her forehead to his. For the first time she believed it. The empire had fallen, but the man she loved was still here. Not as a billionaire, not a titan, but as Isaac, the man who had once walked her home on a rainy night, who had whispered dreams into her skin, who had chosen her now, even at the cost of everything else. But fate was not done testing them. That night, as the city lights blurred into darkness, Camila's body trembled with the unmistakable pangs of labor. At first, she tried to steady herself to breathe through the ache. But soon, the contractions came stronger, fiercer, each one stealing her breath. "Isaac," she gasped, gripping his arm. His heart stopped. "Is it time?" She nodded, sweat already purling on her brow. The world blurred after that, Isaac rushing to gather her things. The blare of sirens as a car cut through the snow-slicked streets, the sterile brightness of the hospital. For a man who had faced hostile boards and billion-dollar gambles, Isaac had never known fear like this. Watching Camila writhe in pain, hearing her cries tear through the air, knowing there was nothing he could do but hold her hand and pray. Hours passed like lifetimes. At one point, her grip crushed his fingers, her eyes wild with pain. "Please don't leave me," she sobbed. "Never." He swore, his lips brushing her damp hair. "I'm here, always here." And when the first cry filled the room, a sharp, miraculous sound, Isaac felt his knees weaken. Their child, their daughter, tiny, perfect, alive. Camila cradled the newborn against her chest, her face damp with tears, her exhaustion softened by awe. Isaac sat beside her, unable to look away, his hand trembling as he stroked the baby's delicate hair. "She's beautiful," Camila whispered. "She's you," Isaac murmured, voice breaking. But then the door opened, and shadows spilled in. Nathaniel stood there, his suit immaculate, his smile thin and poisonous. "Well," he drawled, eyes flicking to the child, "I see you've wasted no time creating your legacy." Isaac's body went rigid. "Get out." Nathaniel stepped closer, ignoring the warning. "You've lost everything, brother. Do you think love will protect you now? Do you believe this?" His eyes slid disdainfully to Camila. "Will keep you standing when the world chews you up." Camila's chest tightened, but Isaac rose firmly between her and Nathaniel. "No," he said, his voice steady steel beneath fire. "She doesn't keep me standing. She makes standing worth it." Nathaniel laughed coldly. "Pathetic." Isaac stepped forward, his eyes locked on his brother's. "No, Nathaniel. What's pathetic is clinging to power because you've never known love. You can have the company, have the money, have every tower with my name on it. But I have something you'll never touch." And for the first time, Nathaniel faltered. His sneer wavered slightly before he turned and stalked from the room. The days that followed were unlike any Isaac had known. Gone were the endless meetings, the boardrooms, the negotiations. Instead, there were sleepless nights, bottles warmed at dawn lullabies, sung in the half-light of the nursery. Camila's laughter filled the rooms again, soft and unguarded. And Isaac fell in love, not just with her all over again, but with the quiet miracle of family. They had little compared to what he once held: no empire, no endless staff, no armies of assistants. But what they had was real, and it was enough. One evening, as snow drifted softly outside, Camila stood at the window with their daughter in her arms. Isaac wrapped his arms around them both, pressing a kiss to Camila's temple. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Losing everything?" He smiled, weary but certain. "I didn't lose everything. I found you. I found her. And that's more than I ever dreamed." Her eyes filled, and she turned into his chest, her heart finally at peace. Months later, spring crept into the city. The scandals faded, the headlines turned elsewhere. Isaac found work again, not building empires, but investing quietly in small ventures, community projects, things that mattered. And Camila returned to her art painting again, her hands creating beauty in every stroke. Together they built a life not gilded in gold, but woven in love. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights began to glow, Isaac lifted their daughter into his arms, her laughter ringing like music. Camila watched them, her heart swelling knowing the truth. At last, love was not in the chandeliers or the glass towers. Love was here, in laughter, struggle, firelight and ashes. And as Isaac met her gaze across the room, his smile tender, she knew that they had built something unshakable even in ruin. The story of Isaac Robinson and Camila Harris wasn't one of wealth or empire. It was one of love that survived the storm, love that rose from ashes, love that built a home where none had stood before. And perhaps that is why you've stayed with them, through heartbreak and betrayal, scandal and ruin, and the fragile beauty of their rebirth. Because in their story, there is a truth we all crave. That love, when it is real, is stronger than fear, stronger than loss, stronger than anything the world can take away. If you felt their journey stir something in your heart, let us know in the comments what moment struck you most. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in love that survives every storm, and follow our channel for more stories that remind us of the power of the human heart. Your support helps us continue creating tales that move, heal, and inspire. Because every story deserves to be told, and maybe, just maybe, the next one could be yours.